There is a moment that comes quietly, without announcement, without warning. A man may not even notice it at first. It arrives in small ways, in the silence between messages, in the stillness of an evening that feels slightly heavier than usual. It is the first stirring, the subtle whisper of absence beginning to echo through his awareness. What was once ordinary, a conversation, a shared laugh, a presence he took for granted, begins to reveal its significance through its disappearance. This is not pain, not yet. It is a realization that something once alive within him has grown quiet, and that quiet now speaks louder than words. At this stage, he does not understand what he is feeling. The world around him continues as usual. Work, noise, movement. Yet a part of him is distracted. He finds himself reaching for his phone, then pulling his hand back without reason. He tells himself it's nothing, that he is simply busy, that time will fill the space. But time does not fill this kind of space. It stretches it, magnifies it, turns it into a mirror where he begins to see what was once invisible. Absence, in its strange wisdom, begins to show him what presence truly meant. The echo of absence is not only emotional, it is energetic. He begins to sense a shift inside his body. The way he breathes, the way he sleeps, the way certain songs now carry a different weight. Memories rise like waves, uninvited. They come not as nostalgia, but as lessons, reminding him of the simplicity he overlooked. The laughter that once passed easily now lingers as a memory he replays unconsciously. The moments that felt casual now return with new depth. This is how absence begins its work, not by taking away, but by showing the hidden layers of what once was. He may resist this realization at first. He distracts himself. He engages in conversations. He fills his calendar, but the echo does not fade. It follows him into quiet moments, while driving, while standing in line, while staring at the ceiling at night. It speaks through the spaces he tries to fill. And slowly, the truth reveals itself. He is not missing the person as much as he is missing the finer feeling that person brought into his life. The calm, the connection, the sense of being understood without words. This recognition stirs something ancient within him, something that cannot be silenced by logic. The first stirring of missing someone is rarely loud. It is delicate, like the first ripple in still water. Yet within that subtle movement lies the beginning of emotional awakening. Because for a man who has learned to armor himself with control, the experience of missing someone breaks that armor in the gentlest way possible. It reminds him that no amount of strength can silence the soul's longing for closeness. He begins to see that missing is not weakness. It is a form of remembering, a sign that something sacred once touched his heart. This is the stage where he starts to question himself, not out of confusion but out of introspection. He wonders why certain faces in a crowd remind him of her, why certain moments feel incomplete without her presence. He begins to understand that emotional connection is not something the mind can fully command. The heart, once awakened, has its own rhythm, its own intelligence. It pulls him inward, asking him to listen, not to the noise of thought, but to the quiet space beneath it, the space where the echo of absence lives. The more he listens, the more he begins to realize that absence is not empty. It is full of energy, full of reflections, full of unseen dialogue. It becomes a teacher, pointing him toward awareness. The things he once overlooked, a shared silence, a small gesture, a look in the eyes, now return to him as fragments of truth. They teach him that love is not always in the grand expressions, but in the subtle, almost invisible exchanges of presence. Missing someone deeply awakens him to the depth of these exchanges. It shows him that connection is not measured by proximity, but by resonance. The frequency two hearts create when they recognize each other. At this point, a man begins to notice the contrast between the outer world and his inner world. The outer world demands performance, achievement, stability. But the inner world begins to soften. It begins to yearn for stillness, for authenticity, for meaning. The echo of absence is now transforming into a call for understanding. He begins to ask himself what that connection truly meant, what it awakened within him, and what part of himself he might have lost when it was gone. This questioning marks the shift from attachment to awareness. In this first stage, there is a quiet awakening of humility. He begins to see how easy it is to overlook something valuable until it is no longer there. Absence humbles him, it strips away the illusion of control. It teaches him that love cannot be managed, timed, or replaced. It is not a possession. It is a presence that either flows through him or fades from him depending on his awareness. The more he resists missing, the stronger the echo becomes. But when he allows it, when he sits with the ache rather than running from it, he starts to perceive the essence of what was shared. This essence is not bound by memory or identity. It is something more subtle, a vibration, a warmth, a familiar energy that still lingers within his heart. The echo of absence becomes a guide, leading him back to that inner space where he can meet himself again. Because in truth, when a man misses someone deeply, he is not only reaching outward, he is being invited inward. He is being asked to reconnect with the part of himself that learned to feel through her, the part that softened, that cared, that loved without needing to be strong. The first stirring is therefore not an emotional breakdown, but an emotional awakening. It is the soul reminding him that connection leaves imprints, not just memories. It is the whisper that tells him presence is a gift, not a guarantee, and it is through this subtle ache, through this gentle but persistent echo of absence, that he begins to remember what it truly means to feel alive. When the first echo of absence has settled into his heart, a man enters another stage, one that is far less peaceful. It is the restlessness of the mind. The calm awareness that once allowed him to simply feel the absence now turns into a storm of questions, doubts, and endless thoughts. The mind, unable to rest, begins to wander into every memory, every possibility, every what if that could explain the emptiness he feels. What begins as gentle reflection soon becomes a maze, and he becomes both the traveler and the one lost within it. This restlessness is not only mental, it is deeply emotional. It disguises itself as curiosity, but beneath it lies the inability to let go. He begins to replay old conversations, dissecting each word for hidden meaning. He remembers moments that once felt ordinary, but now seem like clues. The mind becomes obsessed with finding logic in something that was never meant to be understood by logic. He searches for answers to feelings that cannot be solved, only observed. But the human mind resists such simplicity. It wants closure, definition, reason. And so it runs in circles, chasing peace through thought, while unknowingly feeding its own chaos. In this stage, the man often feels torn between two worlds, the external, where he continues to function as if nothing has changed, and the internal, where every thought seems to orbit around what is missing. The outer life demands focus and productivity, but the inner life keeps whispering reminders. A scent, a song, a place, they trigger fragments of emotion that pull him out of the present moment. The mind becomes restless because it cannot accept the contradiction, how something so absent can still feel so present. He tells himself to move on, to let it pass, but the very act of trying to move on becomes another way of holding on. The restlessness grows stronger in silence. When the day slows and distractions fade, the mind becomes a stage where memories replay themselves without permission. He lies awake at night, his thoughts shifting between longing and resistance. He questions what he could have done differently, what signs he might have missed. This questioning is endless because it has no destination. It is the mind trying to control what the heart has already accepted. And yet it is also a necessary stage, for through this mental turbulence, the truth begins to take shape, not through answers, but through exhaustion. As the mind grows restless, it also begins to reveal its limitations. No matter how deeply he analyzes, he cannot fully explain why he feels the way he does. The more he thinks, the less he understands. Logic becomes powerless in the face of emotion. The mind wants clarity, the heart speaks in mystery, and this conflict creates tension, a friction between understanding and feeling. It is within this friction that growth begins, though he cannot see it yet. The discomfort is not punishment, it is transformation beginning to stir beneath confusion. The restlessness manifests in many subtle ways. He may find himself avoiding stillness, filling his schedule with activity to drown out thought. He may distract himself with work, with people, with movement, but the mind's noise only grows louder in avoidance. Because the mind, when restless, is like an untamed animal. The more you run from it, the more it chases you. It needs to be observed, not escaped. Yet this lesson cannot be told. It must be lived. Every restless night, every unquiet thought, every unexplainable wave of emotion is part of that living process. He begins to feel the tension between his masculine need for control and the uncontrollable nature of his emotions. For many men, the mind is a shield, a place of structure, logic, and protection. But when longing enters, that shield begins to crack. He realizes that no amount of mental strength can contain what the heart releases. This realization frightens him at first. To lose control of thought feels like weakness. But gradually, he begins to see that this restlessness is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign that his inner world is expanding beyond what the mind can comprehend. There are moments in this stage when he becomes quiet, not because the restlessness is gone, but because he is too tired to resist it. In that quiet, he begins to notice the pattern of his thoughts, how they move in circles, how they repeat themselves, how they feed on memory and imagination. He begins to see that missing someone is not only an emotional experience, it is also a battle of perception. The mind projects, imagines, replays, and regrets. It builds illusions and then tries to tear them down. And through this constant motion, he begins to understand that peace will never come from solving the past, it can only come from observing the present. The restlessness also teaches him humility. It shows him how fragile his control truly is, how easily the mind can be led by feeling. He begins to see that his thoughts are not absolute truths, but movements of energy. Temporary, shifting, unpredictable. Sometimes he is angry, sometimes nostalgic, sometimes hopeful. The mind keeps changing its story, but the feeling underneath remains the same longing. The more he tries to escape it through thought, the deeper it pulls him inward. It is as if the heart is whispering through the noise, asking him to stop analyzing and simply feel. At times, this restlessness makes him feel distant from himself. He cannot fully focus on his work. He cannot fully enjoy what once brought him pleasure. The mind keeps returning to the same question. Why do I still feel this way? But the answer never arrives through questioning, it arrives through surrender. Still, he is not ready for that surrender yet. He must first walk through the storm of his own thoughts, face every unfinished emotion, every unspoken word. The restlessness is his initiation, a cleansing of all illusions that keep him bound to the past. And as days pass, he starts to notice something subtle. The thoughts no longer come as strongly as before. They still visit, but they no longer control. The restlessness begins to soften, not because the missing has disappeared, but because the mind is learning its limit. It begins to understand that not everything needs to be solved, some feelings are meant to be experienced. This understanding does not come suddenly. It comes slowly, like dawn emerging after a long night. But before that light arrives, he must first sit through the storm, letting the mind exhaust itself until silence becomes the only place left to rest after the storm of the restless mind. When exhaustion begins to soften his thoughts and silence becomes less a burden and more a refuge, something gentle begins to awaken within him. It does not come with force or reason, but with a quiet familiarity. The slow, steady return of the heart. Where the mind once sought answers, the heart seeks only to feel. Where logic once demanded clarity, the heart offers depth. It does not explain, it reminds. It reminds him of what it means to be human, to care, to ache, to love without needing a reason. The return of the heart is not a decision. It is a surrender, a natural unfolding after the mind has worn itself thin. In this stage, he begins to sense emotions that had been buried beneath noise and denial. He feels them not as sudden waves, but as slow tides rising through his being. There is warmth again, but it is mixed with vulnerability. The heart remembers what the mind tried to forget. The small gestures, the moments of stillness, the comfort of presence that once existed without effort. Every memory now carries not pain, but tenderness. The anger fades. The confusion loses power. What remains is a quiet recognition that what was shared was real and what is missed is meaningful. The return of the heart often feels disorienting because it contrasts everything the mind was trying to protect. The mind fought to remain strong, to appear detached, to move forward. But the heart does not understand the language of detachment. It moves through feeling, not through control. When it returns, it brings honesty. It does not care for appearances or outcomes, it simply opens. And with that opening comes both relief and ache. He realizes that love, once awakened, cannot be fully silenced. It lingers, not as attachment, but as awareness, a reminder that connection leaves its trace long after presence fades. At first, this awakening feels raw. He may feel tears rise without knowing why. He may feel his chest tighten when he hears a certain voice or sees something that reminds him of what once was. These are not signs of weakness. They are signs of aliveness. For the heart, when it begins to return, does not bring back pain to punish him. It brings back sensitivity to restore him. It asks him to feel again, to stop running, to breathe into what he once avoided. It invites him to rediscover the language of emotion, a language that needs no words, only honesty. He begins to notice that the world around him starts to change subtly. The same sunrise feels different. The air feels heavier with meaning. Music that once faded into the background now carries emotion that reaches through him. This is not nostalgia. It is reconnection. The heart is teaching him to see again, to listen again, to feel without judgment. Through this return, he learns that love was never truly about another person. It was about what opened within him because of them. The person was the mirror, but the reflection was always his own heart. As the heart returns, it brings with it humility. He begins to see how easily he took emotional connection for granted, how often he confused care with comfort and love with possession. The returning heart has no interest in control. It desires understanding. It reminds him that to truly love is not to hold, but to witness. It asks him to honor what he felt, even if it cannot be relived. And in that honoring, healing begins quietly, without effort, without announcement. He starts to move through his days with a different awareness. He no longer tries to push emotions away. When sadness comes, he lets it sit beside him. When longing returns, he allows it to breathe. He begins to realize that emotions are not enemies, they are guides. Each one carries a message to remind him where he has loved, where he has feared, where he has grown. The return of the heart teaches him that pain and love are not opposites. They are two expressions of the same truth. To feel deeply is to live deeply. This stage is also where compassion begins to emerge. Not only compassion for the one he misses, but for himself. He sees the man he was, guarded, uncertain, afraid to feel, and he begins to forgive him. He understands that his distance, his silence, his mistakes were not signs of indifference, but of unawareness. The returning heart shows him that every human being learns love through imperfection. And in seeing his own vulnerability, he begins to understand the vulnerability of others. This realization softens him. He becomes more patient, less reactive, more present. The return of the heart is not about rekindling what once was. It is about awakening what still is. It is the realization that love's true essence does not depend on reciprocation. Even when distance remains, the heart continues to give. It continues to remember, not with attachment, but with gratitude. Gratitude for what was felt, for what was learned, for what remains alive within him. The heart does not cling, it expands. It uses longing as a path toward wisdom. It transforms missing into remembering, and remembering into understanding. At times he may still feel the mind resisting this openness. The mind will whisper, move on, forget. But the heart speaks differently. It says, stay present, feel. It does not demand that he forget, it invites him to integrate. It knows that healing does not come from erasing memories, but from allowing them to live peacefully within him. The more he listens, the more he learns that the heart is not fragile. It is resilient. It can hold both love and loss without breaking. It can feel deeply and still remain whole. There is a profound stillness in this stage. He no longer seeks to fill the void with noise or distractions. He allows silence to exist, not as emptiness, but as space for feeling. And in that space, he begins to sense the quiet rhythm of life again. The heartbeat that was once hidden behind thought begins to steady itself. He feels connected, not to a person, but to life itself. This connection is pure, unforced, alive. It is the same connection he once felt through her presence, now rediscovered within his own being. And so, as the heart returns, it does not bring answers, but understanding. It does not promise reunion, but revelation. It opens the path from thought to feeling, from resistance to acceptance, from longing to awareness. It allows him to see that love never truly leaves. It simply changes its form. It moves from being between two people to being within one, from seeking outward to resting inward, from desire to devotion, from absence to presence. There comes a stage when the man, having felt the ache of absence and the pull of his heart's return, finds himself standing between two powerful forces within. It is not a battle fought in words or actions, but in silence, in the quiet inner space where pride and vulnerability meet. One side tells him to remain composed, to protect his dignity, to show no weakness. The other side whispers to open, to feel, to express what still lingers unspoken. These two voices do not coexist peacefully. They wrestle for dominance. each believing it holds the key to strength. This is the battle between pride and vulnerability, a struggle that every man faces when he begins to feel deeply but fears the cost of showing it. Pride is his armor. It is what keeps him upright when the world expects him to be unshaken. It tells him that to show emotion is to lose control, to reach out is to surrender power, to admit pain is to appear weak. Pride convinces him that silence is strength, that distance is dignity, and that detachment is the way to regain balance. It protects him, but it also isolates him. It builds walls high enough to shield him from rejection, but those same walls also keep warmth away. Pride is the voice that says, "You do not need anyone," even as his heart aches for the one he misses. Vulnerability, on the other hand, speaks a different language. It does not shout, it whispers. It reminds him that strength is not found in suppression, but in honesty. It tells him that to feel deeply is not a flaw, but a form of courage. Vulnerability calls him to open, to risk being seen, to acknowledge what is true within him. But this invitation terrifies him, for vulnerability is raw, unpredictable, and exposes the very emotions he has tried to hide. The battle begins when he realizes that his pride protects his image, while vulnerability protects his truth. At first, pride usually wins. It convinces him that control is power, that silence will heal, that emotions must be tamed. He goes through his days pretending indifference, wearing a mask of composure. To others, he seems calm, even unaffected. But inside, the conflict intensifies. The more he suppresses, the louder his feelings become. The body begins to feel the tension, the tightness in his chest, the restlessness at night, the heaviness that lingers in quiet moments. These are the signs that pride may silence the mouth, but it cannot silence the soul. The heart continues to speak even when he refuses to listen. Over time, cracks begin to appear in his armor. Perhaps it happens when he hears her name or when a memory resurfaces unexpectedly. Perhaps it happens in solitude when he no longer has to pretend. The truth seeps through those cracks like light entering a dark room. He feels tears threaten to rise, though he does not want them to. He feels words sitting on his tongue that he cannot bring himself to speak. It is in these moments that he stands on the edge between pride and vulnerability, unsure which side to choose. Pride urges him to retreat, to regain control, to distract himself, to remind himself of logic. But vulnerability holds him there softly, asking him to stay with what he feels, to stop resisting. And in that stillness, he begins to realize that the pain he feels is not a sign of weakness, but a sign of care. It is not his pride that proves he loved, it is his vulnerability. It is the willingness to feel that connects him to what is real. The more he resists, the more he suffers, but the moment he allows himself to feel, the heaviness begins to transform. This inner battle reveals how deeply conditioning shapes a man's heart. From a young age, he is taught to be strong, to control, to provide, to endure. Emotion, when it arrives, feels like a threat to that identity. But the truth is, the greatest form of strength lies in the courage to stay open in the face of pain. Vulnerability is not weakness, it is honesty without armor. It is the quiet acknowledgement that even strength has tenderness, that even certainty has doubt, that even pride needs humility to become whole. As he observes this battle within himself, he begins to see its pattern. Pride reacts, vulnerability responds. Pride builds distance, vulnerability builds connection. Pride wants victory, vulnerability seeks understanding. And as he moves through these realizations, he begins to soften, not because he has chosen one side, but because he has begun to see the purpose of both. Pride was never the enemy, it was protection. Vulnerability was never the danger, it was the doorway. The balance lies not in choosing one, but in allowing both to coexist with awareness. In moments of deep reflection, he feels how exhausting pride has been. It has demanded that he appear unaffected when his heart is heavy, that he stay silent when words are needed, that he hold back love out of fear of rejection. But what pride protects, it also imprisons. It keeps him safe, but it also keeps him alone. Vulnerability, though uncertain, offers freedom. It allows him to breathe again, to speak without rehearsing, to love without bargaining. Yet even as he begins to see this truth, pride continues to pull at him, a familiar shadow reminding him of control. The battle continues, not as violence, but as rhythm, forward and back, open and closed, strength and softness intertwined. The moments when he chooses vulnerability are the moments when he rediscovers himself. Perhaps it is when he finally admits to himself that he misses her. Perhaps it is when he allows a tear to fall without shame. Perhaps it is when he stops pretending that he is unaffected. In those moments, the walls fall and he feels not weaker but lighter. Vulnerability teaches him that being seen in truth is far more powerful than being seen as strong. It shows him that authenticity heals what pride cannot protect. As this inner struggle unfolds, he begins to realize that pride and vulnerability are not opposites, but partners in growth. Pride teaches boundaries, vulnerability teaches openness. Pride gives him structure, vulnerability gives him depth. When balanced, they create integrity, the ability to stand tall without closing the heart. The man who learns this balance begins to understand that real strength is quiet, steady, compassionate. It does not need to prove itself. It simply allows him to live truthfully, to love fully, to be human without apology. And though the battle continues within him, it begins to change shape. No longer a war to be won, it becomes a dialogue to be understood. Pride no longer needs to silence vulnerability, and vulnerability no longer needs to destroy pride. Both learn to bow to each other, one offering stability, the other offering authenticity. Through this, he begins to move from resistance to harmony, from inner conflict to inner understanding, from protecting his heart to allowing it to live freely within him. After the quiet surrender that follows the battle within, there arrives a new stage. Not dramatic, not loud, but profound. It is the realization of connection. The man who once tried to make sense of longing through thought, who fought against emotion with pride, begins to see something that transcends reason. He starts to understand that the feeling of missing someone is not a weakness of the heart, but evidence of a bond that exists beyond time, distance, or circumstance. It is not about attachment anymore. It is about recognition. The recognition of a connection that does not dissolve just because the physical presence has faded. In this realization, he begins to see that what he feels is not only emotional but spiritual. There is a thread, invisible yet undeniable, that ties one soul to another through memory, energy, and awareness. It cannot be touched or explained, yet it continues to move within him. The mind has tried to label it, to categorize it as love, attachment, or nostalgia. But now the heart knows better. This connection is not a thought, it is a state of being. It is the quiet knowing that the presence of another continues to live within his own inner space, influencing his thoughts, his emotions, and even the rhythm of his breath. He begins to understand that connection is not created through constant communication or shared experiences. It is created through presence, through those moments when two beings meet in truth, without masks, without pretense. Those moments do not fade with time. They remain imprinted in the deeper layers of consciousness. The man begins to realize that the one he misses is not gone, for she still exists within the energy that shaped him. Her influence is carried in his gestures, in his words, in the way he perceives the world. This realization softens the pain of longing, not by removing it, but by transforming it into reverence. At this stage, he stops asking why he still feels connected. The question itself dissolves. He no longer seeks logic to explain what the soul already understands. Connection is not something that needs to be maintained. It simply is. The energy of it flows beneath the surface of thought like an underground current. Even when there is silence between them, even when paths have diverged, the bond remains quietly alive, shaping him from within. It teaches him that love, in its truest form, is not ownership but resonance. It does not depend on closeness, it depends on awareness. He may notice that certain moments bring her presence back to him in subtle ways. A familiar scent in the air, a phrase overheard, a piece of music that opens a space in his chest. These moments are not coincidences, they are reminders. They remind him that connection operates on a level deeper than time or logic. It is an energetic dialogue that continues even when words have stopped. Through these moments, he begins to understand that missing someone is not a sign of lack. It is a sign of connection still alive. The longing he once tried to escape now becomes something sacred, a doorway through which he reconnects with his own heart. The realization of connection also brings humility. He begins to see how small the mind is in comparison to the vastness of feeling. The mind measures time, distance, outcomes. The heart measures depth, truth, and resonance. What he feels is not bound by the linear progression of days. It moves in cycles, like the tides. Sometimes strong, sometimes soft, but always present. He realizes that true connection does not demand effort to sustain it. It exists in the silence between two people who once recognized each other at the level of the soul. He starts to reflect on the purpose of such a bond. Why would the universe allow two paths to cross so deeply only to separate them later? The mind once saw this as loss, but now the heart begins to see it as lesson. Every connection serves to awaken something within him, an awareness, a depth, a reflection of what he needed to see in himself. Through her, he discovered parts of himself he had long forgotten: tenderness, patience, passion, vulnerability. The realization dawns that connection is not only about two people, it is also about the evolution of the self through relationship. The other becomes a mirror, and through that mirror, the soul grows. This understanding changes the way he perceives love altogether. It is no longer something he wishes to possess or hold on to. It becomes something he honors, something he allows to exist in its purest form. He begins to feel gratitude rather than grief, understanding that connection does not end when the relationship does. It evolves, shifts, transforms, sometimes into distance, sometimes into memory, sometimes into wisdom. But it never truly disappears. Energy, once exchanged in truth, continues to echo in both hearts. As he reflects on this, he realizes that connection is not about needing the other person. It is about recognizing the part of himself that was awakened by them. The love he thought was directed outward now begins to turn inward. He sees that what he admired, what he longed for, what he missed, all of it was also a reflection of what was possible within his own being. The connection becomes a guide back to himself, teaching him that what he sought in another was never separate from what lived within him. Through this realization, peace begins to return. It is not the peace of forgetting, but the peace of understanding. He no longer feels torn between holding on and letting go. He understands that both can coexist. To hold the connection in the heart while allowing life to move forward is the true balance. He learns that love is not meant to be caged within definitions or expectations. It is meant to flow freely, to teach, to heal, and to expand. The realization of connection changes how he sees everything around him. He begins to notice the threads of connection that exist in all things, between people, between nature and self, between silence and sound. The world feels less fragmented. He feels less alone. The same energy that once tied him to one person now begins to reveal itself in every encounter, every exchange, every breath. He begins to sense that all connection, at its core, is one, expressions of the same universal flow that moves through all beings. And so the man no longer tries to escape what he feels. He no longer fights the memories or questions the longing. He simply allows it to exist as part of his being. The connection remains, not as an open wound, but as a quiet rhythm that continues to beat beneath the surface of his life. It reminds him that love is not confined by form, and that what is truly shared between two souls never fades. It only changes shape, continuing to live in silence, in energy, in awareness, and in the eternal language of the heart. There comes a stage when the ache of missing no longer feels like a wound, but like a slow unfolding, a deep, inner movement that begins to change its meaning. What once felt heavy and unbearable begins to soften, to breathe differently within him. The man who once resisted the emptiness now begins to observe it, to understand it, to learn from it. The longing that used to pull him backward now starts to guide him inward. This is the quiet moment when missing transforms into growth, when absence becomes a teacher, and pain becomes the soil from which awareness begins to bloom. In the beginning, missing feels like loss, a void that the mind tries to fill with thoughts and memories. But over time, he begins to see that the emptiness itself carries wisdom. It invites him to stop searching outward for what was and start listening inward to what remains. The longing becomes a mirror, reflecting not what is gone, but what was awakened within him through that connection. He begins to ask deeper questions, not about the other but about himself. Why did this bond touch him so deeply? What part of his soul was seen, understood, and mirrored through that person? What truth within him was brought to life through love, and what does its absence now reveal? Missing someone deeply becomes the beginning of a journey back to the self. It strips away illusions, attachments, and identities built around another person's presence. He starts to see how often love was sought as completion, as validation, as escape. But now, in the stillness of missing, he learns that love was never meant to fill him. It was meant to reveal him. Every ache, every memory, Every longing feeling becomes an invitation to return to the source of love that already lives within him. This realization does not come suddenly, it comes quietly, through countless moments of sitting alone, through the silence that once felt unbearable and now begins to feel sacred. As he moves through this transformation, he notices that the same emotions that once caused him suffering now bring understanding. The sadness, instead of closing him, begins to open him. The emptiness that once felt like absence now feels like space, space to grow, to breathe, to discover himself beyond what he once clung to. This process is not comfortable. It is not meant to be. Growth rarely feels gentle at first. It is messy, confusing, and unpredictable. But within that discomfort lies the beginning of freedom. The freedom to exist without depending on someone else's presence to feel complete. He begins to see that every person who enters his life brings a lesson. Some teach joy, some teach patience, some teach love, and some teach loss. But the purpose is always the same: to awaken something within him. The one he misses may have awakened his heart, but it is now his responsibility to continue that awakening on his own. Missing becomes a teacher of resilience. It teaches him how to sit with emotion without needing to fix it, how to accept impermanence without losing appreciation, how to let go without closing his heart. This is how longing becomes transformation, by turning dependence into discovery and pain into presence. There is a point when he starts to feel gratitude for the very thing that once caused him pain. Not because the loss was easy, but because it led him to himself. Without the distance, he might never have learned the depth of his own capacity to love. Without the silence, he might never have heard the voice within him that speaks when everything else is gone. The transformation of missing into growth is not about forgetting. It is about remembering differently, remembering with awareness instead of attachment, with compassion instead of regret. He begins to see that love's true purpose is not to provide comfort, but to expand consciousness. Every connection that touches the heart leaves behind a trace of energy that continues to guide him forward. The longing he feels becomes less about wanting the past back and more about integrating the lessons it offered. He starts to live differently, with more gentleness, more patience, more presence. He listens more deeply, speaks more truthfully, and loves more consciously. The absence that once consumed him now refines him. It polishes the rough edges of ego, revealing the quiet clarity that comes when a man learns to feel without fear. The growth that comes from missing is not external. It does not appear as immediate change. It happens in subtle ways, in the way he responds to emotion, in how he values connection, in the depth of his silence. He becomes less reactive, more observant. He realizes that pain was never meant to be escaped, only understood. Missing someone deeply teaches him the art of surrender, the acceptance that not all things are meant to stay, and that some love exists only to awaken the heart to its own depth. This understanding brings peace, not because the longing disappears, but because it becomes meaningful. In this transformation, he learns that growth is not about replacing what was lost, it is about expanding enough to include it within his being. The love he once directed outward now becomes part of his inner landscape, not as sadness, but as wisdom. The heart that once broke open now stays open, no longer afraid of the SHI that comes with feeling. He begins to trust that everything he experiences, even the painful parts, is part of his becoming. Missing someone deeply becomes the path through which he rediscovers the eternal truth that love never truly ends, it only changes its form. As he walks through life with this understanding, he carries the connection not as a weight, but as a light. It guides him toward greater awareness, greater empathy, greater stillness. He no longer runs from longing, he walks with it. He no longer hides his vulnerability, he honors it. The very feeling that once weakened him now strengthens him. What was once a wound has become wisdom, what was once emptiness has become expansion. The man who once tried to resist emotion has learned that emotion itself is not the enemy, unconsciousness is. And now through this transformation, he no longer fears missing. He sees it as a sacred passage through which the heart learns to grow beyond possession, beyond pain, and beyond the illusion of separation.